The clock was ticking, and outside the thick soundproof walls in the White House Situation Room, Washington was still very much awake. News anchors filled the airwaves with speculation. Political analysts sharpened their knives, and somewhere on Capitol Hill Chuck Schumer was probably adjusting his glasses. He believed he was in control, but here, in this room, here was where the real game happened. The atmosphere thick, not with smoke but with strategy. This had been punctuated by a low hum of monitors, breaking the silence, their cold blue light glaring at a mahogany table where Mark Meadows, Stephen Miller, and Kevin McCarthy sat waiting. No one spoke. No one shifted. They were waiting for a man. Then the doors burst open. Donald Trump strolled in, unhurried, unbothered, purposeful. It was like feeling a change in air pressure, and a repeated force that is so ordinary and yet so strong. His trademark red tie loosened a notch. His overcoat slung over one shoulder, as if he'd been stopped in his tracks by something too trivial to find time to buckle it in properly. Not interrupting his stride, he plucked the coat off and tossed it over a chair, as though it were in debt to him. The three men turned to look at him, instantly. Trump did not take a seat, had no reason to. He pushed both hands flat against the table. His fingers splayed. His face was inscrutable. But his eyes told the story. Impatience, calculation, the quiet fury of a man watching his enemies fuck up right into his lap. Finally he spoke, his voice cutting through electric ELD like a knife. "All right, someone tell me. What the fuck is Schumer thinking?" The silence only lasted a beat too long. The clock was ticking, and outside the thick soundproofed walls of the White House Situation Room, Washington remained wide awake. The airwaves were crowded with news anchors speculating, political analysts sharpening knives, and somewhere on Capitol Hill Chuck Schumer was probably adjusting his glasses. He thought he was in control, but here in this room, here is where the real game was played. The air was thick, not with smoke, but with strategy. A low hum of monitors shattered the silence, the frigid blue light lighting up the mahogany table where Mark Meadows, Stephen Miller, and Kevin McCarthy waited. No one spoke. No one shifted. They were waiting for a man. Then the doors burst open. Donald Trump sauntered in, unhurried, unshaken, purposeful. He filled the room like an air pressure change, a force so ubiquitous and yet so formidable. His signature red tie fluttered free, his overcoat draped over one shoulder, as if he had been stopped in mid-stride by something that wasn't worth his time to get around to buckling it. And then it was Stephen Miller, his face a non-face, his hands at rest on the table, speaking in his usual measured, almost mechanical style. "Mr. President, it appears Chuck Schumer, who is a Democrat, doesn't have much use for democracy." Trump blinked, pulled himself up, exhaled through his nose, crossed his arms, and drummed his fingers against his sleeve, pursed his lips thin, and stared at Miller for a moment, as if weighing the options of being amused or angry. Finally, he let out a low, humorless laugh. "You see, Stephen, I always want to be surprised. I really should. But this is sort of Schumer being Schumer at this point. This guy, he's a total fucking train wreck." Mark Meadows, who had followed the exchange like an onlooker at a prize fight, adjusted his tie. Kevin McCarthy writhed in his chair, but said nothing. He had learned not to interrupt Trump when he was building steam. Trump grimaced and shook his head. "This is a joke. A complete joke. And I'll tell you something. This is a joke on the American people. We give them a spending plan, the same goddamn spending plan they passed last year, and suddenly Schumer's got a problem? Give me a break." He leaned into Miller, his voice dropping down into that slow, building, dramatic cadence he reserved for making his point. "What's the play here, Stephen?" Miller stayed stoic, lifting his chin slightly, the faintest trace of a smirk on his lips. He put his hands together, leaning just a little bit forward. "Of course you know already, sir." Then there was a heavy silence in the Situation Room. The only sound was Mark Meadows flipping through a folder, his brow scrunched as he focused. Donald Trump, across the table, drummed his fingers against the polished wood and narrowed his eyes in impatience. Properly, without pausing his momentum, he stripped off the coat and tossed it over a chair like he was tossing it a debt his coat owed him. The three men all instantly turned to him. Trump did not sit down. He had no reason to. pressing both palms flat against the table. His fingers splayed. His face was inscrutable. But his eyes told the story. Impatience, calculation, the quiet fury of a man watching his enemies fuck up right into his lap. Finally, he spoke, his voice slicing through the charged air like a knife. All right, someone tell me. What the hell is Schumer thinking? The pause seemed just a beat too long. Okay, Mark, what do we have? The House of Representatives passed that budget extension 2 days ago, Mr. President. Just another day with the usual standard protocols. He froze, flipping to another page. Then yesterday Chuck Schumer made sure this cheese wasn't going to slip through the Senate. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms while he stared at the ceiling as if he were counting all the ways Schumer was about to fuck this up. Doing the math in his head, Stephen Miller, ever disarmingly calm, paused a moment, slowly beginning his speech measured. Well done, Mr. President, but not surprising. Schumer would rather shut down the government than give you a budget to work with. He thinks this is his moment. Trump chuckled dryly, but shook his head. His moment? This guy's been waiting for a moment that you never know will arrive his entire career. He thumped a hard fist atop the table. Tell me something, Mark. Does he even have a plan? Or is this just Schumer being Schumer? Meadows huffed and turned to another page. If so, it's not a good one. But he's creating a stir, and the press is eating it up. Trump's eyes twinkled with annoyance and amusement.
Of course they are. The fake news loves this guy. Loves him. They act like he's some sort of master genius when all he does is stand in front of a mic and bitch. Then there was Kevin McCarthy, who until now had remained mum, but spoke up. Schumer is playing hardball, but we've got leverage. The Democrats don't have the votes to ram this through on their own terms. Okay, he's trying to play games, right? Fine, but we're going to try to make it as tough as possible for him. Trump had just delivered an exaggerated imitation of what he imagined Miller was trying to say, and Miller had stopped looking to his right and stared at Trump as he played through motions, his expression shifting from irritation to something more measured. Stephen, what's the pathway to victory here? And the strategist in Miller let himself smile, if only slightly. Mr. President, I never figured you'd ask. Donald Trump drummed a golden pen on the table, his eyes darting between his aides. His irritation had become something else. And an utterly different shimmer of calculation. Stephen Miller took a tentative step forward. Hands at rest in front of him, voice as smooth as ever. Mr. President, this is the funny part. Trump's eyes narrowed. Oh, I love interesting parts. Tell me, Stephen. It was a small incline of Miller's head, but a ghost of a smirk tugged at the corners of his lips. You are going to work for Chuck Schumer. He's taking a really big stand, making himself the last line of defense from your presidency. He paused, letting the words hang there. But he's doing everything we want in practice. Trump looked intrigued, raising his eyebrow. Go on. When he doesn't pass the budget, he's not just defying you. He is battling what makes the government work. And when the government shuts down, who do you think the American people are going to blame? There was so silence you could hear a pin drop in the room. Mark Meadows chuckled softly. Not the man who laid a budget on a silver platter. Trump's smirk widened. He tilted in the chair and drummed fingers on the armrest. So what you're telling me, Stephen, is that at least some of Schumer fell right into a trap and doesn't even know it. Miller inclined his head. A moth to the flame, sir, Trump said with an audible exhalation, shaking his head in false disbelief. You sort of feel bad for the guy. Almost. Well, Mr. President, I have ideas. The overhead light is muted, a gauzy shadow on the beeswing mahogany conference table. The silence was thick when Mark Meadows grabbed the remote control and, in a practiced motion, tapped his fingers against the buttons. The plasma at the far end of the room crackled to life, flooding the space with the familiar countenance of Chuck Schumer. Meadows said, his tone even but with a hint of merriment. Instead, we should, listen to what Schumer has to say for himself. Trump didn't move at first. He crossed his arms and stared at the senators with an inscrutable expression. But then Schumer's voice rang out across the room. He exhaled through his nose, a sign his patience was wearing thin already. Funding the government was something that should be done on bipartisan basis. A voice that was Schumer's grew from the speakers, his measured cadence filling the hall. But most Republicans took a partisan route, drafting their continuing resolution in a vacuum, no consultation, none whatsoever, with congressional Democrats. There was a twitch of Trump's lips at the repetition. That's cute. On screen, Schumer continued, his spectacles slowly sliding down the bridge of his nose as he clasped his hands and emphasized every syllable of what he said like a school teacher desperate to relay a lesson to a classroom of rowdy kids. And that's because Republicans don't have the votes to invoke cloture on the House CR in the Senate. Miller, who had been unmoving like a statue against the wall, shifted, the arms still crossed, his head tilting imperceptibly to the side. In other words, he's pretending this is about process, when it's really about control. Trump sat up finally, fingers interlaced. Go ahead, give me the rest of that, the rest of it. Schumer's voice droned, self-righteous, confident. Our caucus is unified around a clean CR on April 11th that will keep the government open and give Congress the space it needs to pass bipartisan legislation that we can actually sign into law. As the video ended, the room was plunged into darkness and a thick, suffocating silence fell. Trump paused, his eyes riveted to the empty screen. Then he uncrossed his arms suddenly and pointed at it. That's it? That's the big speech? That's it, sir. Trump scoffed and reclined in his chair. So let me get this straight. This guy is shutting the government down, blocking the budget, blocking all manner of things, and his entire argument is, you didn't ask for our input. He chuckled softly, shaking his head no. I mean, come on. And that's a weak statement even by Schumer standards. Then Stephen Miller stepped up, his voice as measured as ever. This isn't about the budget, this is about making you the bad guy. If they can get you to define a reality using the construction of it. Within your own narrative, it doesn't matter that they will lose in reality, they will win in 2,000 words in media. The air of the room had turned cold, the fleeting quiet becoming something much more brittle. Strategy. The thick wood of the table glistened in the dim light above, the air thick with the weight of what had just appeared on the screen. And so Chuck Schumer's words still seemed to linger in the air between them, a mix of the rehearsed indignation and neat political jujitsu. Stephen Miller remained stock-still, hands clasped in front of himself, before finally speaking up. Mr. President, there is one thing Schumer does not want people to know. Trump, who had been idly drumming his fingers on the table, looked at him, expectant. Oh, I love these parts. Go on, Stephen. The amusement in Miller's voice was as clear as could be, but his voice never cracked. That budget resolution the House passed 2 days ago? This one, too, happens to be Biden. Identical at least to the last decimal. Trump's fingers halted their dance, his head tilted slightly. The exact same? The exact same. So Schumer was all in on it last year. Nothing like bipartisan support, no issues, zilch? A beat. At which point Trump let out a short laugh. George, low, incredulous, he pinwheeled to Mark Meadows, who was already flipping through a folder, corroborating Miller's statements. So let me get this straight. Trump was leaning forward, his palms flat on the table. Chuck Schumer sure didn't have any problem with this budget when it was Biden's budget. Loved it. Couldn't pass it fast enough. But now it's me, and magically it's disastrous. That's a short view of the numbers, sir. Trump tittered, shaking his head as his lips contorted into something between glee and disgust. It's pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. His eyes returned to Miller, and he thought, nobody is gonna see this? Miller snorted through his nose, a smile barely breaking his lips. He is banking on the media's failure to catch on. Praying that if they scream partisan obstructionism enough, nobody will actually bother to go read what's in the bill. Trump sat with his hands in his lap, their fingers drumming again. His brain was already working, recalibrating. Then he nodded, slowly and deliberately, before talking. All right, Stephen, let's confirm that everyone checks. The initial hilarity over Schumer's hypocrisy had given way to something graver. The deadline, March 14th, loomed over them like a slow-moving storm, the sort Washington pretended to prepare for but never actually confronted. Kevin McCarthy cleared his throat, shattering the silence. He slid a thick manila folder across the table, bringing it to a stop just in front of Donald Trump. Mr. President, absent an agreement by midnight on March 14th, and just 48 hours, we're looking at a full-scale government shutdown. His tone was calm, but the weight of it was clear. Trump, who had been leaning an elbow on the table, straightened. 2 taps on the top of the folder, then he opened it. The numbers inside were not so much shocking as grim. McCarthy went on, his tone growing sharper. That means that over 800,000 federal employees will have their paychecks frozen. They either go on unpaid leave or work without pay while Congress sorts this out. Trump let out a slow exhale. He hated this part. The politics of it? Fine. He could handle that. But the people stuck in the crossfire, the border patrol agents, the air traffic controllers, the security at the airports. These were the very folks who were keeping the country running, and they were the first victims when politicians in Washington decided to play around. And toward the back, arms crossed, Stephen Miller moved forward. And it doesn't stop there, Mr. President. His voice was as steady as ever, but there was something more precise in it now. A clinical precision. National parks? Closed. Food safety inspections? Delayed. Social Security offices? Backlogged. The economy gets hurt, and most importantly, your agenda is stalled. Trump's eye darted up to catch Miller's. That's what this is about. It wasn't a question. He already knew. Miller gave a small nod. They don't give a damn about the shutdown, sir. They care about preventing you. Trump leaned back in his seat, rubbing his thumb along the armrest as he considered the angles. Then he said slowly with this grin. Great, if they are willing to go to this extent to stop me, well, let's make sure that people know who's shutting this government down. One conversation about Schumer's slip had morphed into another, sharper, more dangerous one. No longer was this only about a budget, this was about power and control and the eternal game of chess that was Washington politics. Donald Trump sat at the head table, no longer excitedly drumming his fingers or tossing off sarcastic comments. Now, his posture was altered, stiffer, more deliberate. He was waiting. He knew something was coming. Some heavy lifting by Mark Meadows paging through a thick binder didn't make him wait long. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Senator Chuck Schumer has a counter-proposal. Trump didn't blink. Of course he has. A heavy plop, Meadows slapped down the binder. It's implying a short-term extension of the budget. 1 month. That caused Trump's lips to tighten into a thin line. His patience was wearing thin, and everyone else could feel it. 1 month? Trump said slowly, his voice laced with incredulity. 1 month, no additional funding for your policies, no long-term solution, just a delay. Trump shook his head. So let me get this straight. This jackass who just admitted that he won't pass the same budget that he passed under Brandon needs another month to negotiate. He air-quoted the words, irritation coloring his tone. Then Stephen Miller, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His tone was steady, clipped, but edged, as sharp as a razor. That is not negotiation, Mr. President, that is sabotage. He wants more time to extend this out, to create a 24/7 Presitax buffet for the dirty, a constant diet of anti-Trump conspiracy narratives, and again, put you in a box. Trump's jaw tightened. And what if he doesn't get what he wants? Then he wants to just shut down the whole government. The words passed through the room like lead. 1 million federal workers. Paychecks frozen. Critical services stalled. All because Schumer needed to play politics for more time. Trump let the silence hang in the air. stewing in it for a moment. Then he suddenly struck his palm down on the table. That crack, it filled the room. We're not playing this game. Stephen Miller, as ever, was standing by, the remote clutched in his hand, his eyes flat and inscrutable. He pressed a button. The screen at the front of the Zoom room lit up. Mr. President, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez must now know how to tell us what to do. For an instant, Trump's eyebrows shot up. Oh, fantastic. Let's find out what the socialist princess is saying. They lowered the lights a bit while the video played. It was AOC standing in front of a press podium, her signature intensity radiating off the monitor. Republicans run the House, the Senate, and the White House. You run the government. If you have the votes, then do it. If you need Democrats, then you have to deal with Democrats. At that, she hesitated, and then tempered her response with, there's no other word for it, a performative smirk. There are ways to blame someone else, but due to the fact your shoes are untied? This isn't one of them. Silence. The video cut to black. The screen blacked out and the scattered reflections of the men in the table remained on either side. Trump lingered on the moment, then let out a low laugh, shaking his head as if he'd just heard the punchline to a joke that was not all that funny. I gotta give it to her. She knows how to sell a line. He leaned closer, fingers intertwined, lips snaking into something resembling a smile, or something resembling a snarl. Well, that's too bad it's complete trash. Mark Meadows paused for a moment, rubbing his temple. She's making it seem like we have a blank check, that the Democrats aren't doing everything possible to obstruct the process. Oh please, Mark, you know how this goes. It's never their fault. Ever. Schumer could stroll down to the Capitol, light the budget on fire, and I have no doubt in my mind that CNN would say I didn't get the bucket of water there fast enough. The table laughed, but Stephen Miller said nothing, just calculating. He clasped his hands, tilting his head slightly. At the voting booth, it's not about what she's right about, Mr. President, Miller said. It's whether she sounds believable. Trump operated blinkingly in his fourth dimension. Miller's voice was easy, methodical. She does, to those who already want to believe her. She makes it sound pretty good, and the media will do their best to carry water for her, just like always. Trump tapped his fingers on the table, his face stony. Then he abruptly clapped his hands and sat up. All right, fine. If they want to start this one, we play to win. Something sharp, Stephen. A line. A hammer. A fact the fake news cannot spin. Kevin McCarthy sat up in his chair straight, flipping through a new set of polling data. The numbers, starkly unignorable, told a story too blatant for even the media to spin. He glanced down, pushed the report across the table to Donald Trump. Mr. President, here are the numbers back in, and the most recent approval numbers are in. Trump did not even need to reach for the paper. He already knew how it would read. But let McCarthy go on somehow, that he did. 21, he said, waiting. Record low in history, Democrats. Trump put up an eyebrow and slowly drummed his fingers on the table. And us? McCarthy took a breath, a mischievous smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. You? You're at 53%, highest ever. Finally, Trump picked up the paper and looked through it. 53, he burbled with a chuckle. It is a nice-looking number. Stephen Miller, who had been sitting in silence with his fingers clasped together in front of him, leaned in a little. His voice was fluid, methodical. And yet, the Democrats are still trying to pretend that they speak for the American people. Trump shrugged and expanded his smirk. They're not pretending or anything, Stephen. They actually believe it. McCarthy continued, flipping to another page. Americans just handed us the House, and we have work to do. They gave us the Senate. They gave you a majority landslide victory in 2024, and Schumer and his people will close up the entire government to stop you. Trump reclined with his arms resting over the cushion's armrests. He seemed almost amused, but there was steel in his eyes. Let me get this straight. He hesitated, waved his arms around, then rubbed his face, his voice dropping into that careful its own dramatic cadence signature, Thomas Way. They have no real power anymore. They have no mandate, no support, and their entire plan is to hold the government hostage so they can stop me from doing what the American people elected me to do. Miller nodded just the littlest bit. It is not strategy, Mr. President. It's desperation. In the room, there was a beat of silence. Then Trump laughed, a low chuckle, measured, undergirded by the kind of confidence that fills a room. And you know what this tells me? He waved one hand toward the polling data. It tells me that people can see through bullshit. They know who they are really up against. They know who's really fighting for them. So we can't let them do this spin. It has to be very clear what the message is. They're not blocking you. They're blocking America. Trump exhaled, leaning forward again. His smirk was gone now, replaced by something sharper, more focused. Then let's make sure every person in this country knows that. Pale light from the overheads cast long shadows on the table before the board, and the faint hum of the monitors filled the silence. Donald Trump reclined in his seat, fingers steepled, expression inscrutable, but something flickered in his eyes, a gleam of expectation, like a bite about to be caught in the trap. Mark Meadows leaned forward, remote in hand, a knowing smile playing at the edges of his lips. Mr. President, I think you're going to enjoy this one. Trump was resolute, did not waver, did not flinch. Let's see it. Click. The screen at the front of the room lit up, its cool glow spilling over the men. And there he was. Chuck Schumer at the Senate microphone, his spindly frame, his glasses slowly slipping down his nose. He adjusted them then, a telltale sign even he acknowledged was a sign he was blowing smoke. The voice, the same measured cadence, filled the room. This, in fact, is the same Senate that passed the bill to keep the government open, which now awaits President Biden's signature. Trump's lips twitched. Oh, this is going to be good. Schumer continued, his tone heavy, as if he were reading the death notice of a recent passing instead of a fiscal statement. Even a partial government shutdown by extreme House Republicans would have threatened services for moms and kids, hurt our veterans, hurt farmers, hurt homebuyers, and so much more. The video cut. The screen went dark. For a beat, there was quiet. And then Trump erupted, not in rage, not in exasperation, but in the sort of scandalized laughter one does when someone just gifted you the easiest win of your whole life. He slapped the table, shaking his head, his laughter moving through the room like a storm just broken. Are you kidding me? His eyes twinkled as he turned to his staff. This is the same guy? The same guy who is now running around screaming how I'm shutting down government. Stephen Miller, arms crossed, allowed himself a slight, satisfied bob of the head. The very same, sir. Trump pointed toward the now blank screen and shook his head in disbelief. A year ago, Chuck was nearly weeping about how catastrophic even a partial shutdown would be. For the moms, for the kids, he said, settling into a mimicry of Miss Schumer's signature hand-wringing, gestures, and all. And the veterans, too, sir. He really did a number on the veterans. He laughed, brushing his hair with a hand. You can't make this stuff up. It is so pathetic, it is almost commendable. But as rapidly as the rejoicing had come, so too did it fade. His features sharpened, and his voice dropped an octave. Heavier. We need to hammer this. Hard. He tapped his fingers on the desk. Each tap deliberate. I want that clip everywhere. I want a split screen. Schumer now, and Schumer then. I want to show the American people you know what kind of fraud that we're dealing with. Miller nodded. It's already being cut, sir, it's already being cut. Trump, he leaned in, elbows on the table. His smirk was back. But now it felt sharper, more threatening. Good. Let's make sure and expose this entire goddamn country to the fact that this is a joke. The lines were drawn, and everyone in the room understood that. It was no longer just about a budget. This was about power. about who would blink first. Then Donald Trump stood up. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't theatrical. But as soon as his hands slapped the glassy table, the place snapped to attention. Mark Meadows closed his pen. Halfway through scrolling on his phone, Kevin McCarthy stopped. Stephen Miller, calculating as ever, tilted his head just so, watching. Trump's gaze swept over them. Emphasis even, exacting. Here's what we're doing. The room went dead silent. We're not moving. Not an inch. Not a goddamn second. His fingers tapped, once, deliberate. Schumer thinks he can grind this out, make us give up. Well, newsflash, he picked the wrong guy. The words hit like a hammer. Trump's expression stayed flat, but something started to burn in his face, a flicker of thrill. The sort of look a man has when he realizes he's about to win. Stephen Miller, leaning into the wall, finally chimed in, his voice the whisper of steel. An absolute checkmate, sir. His shadow darkened the dim light of the screen. If Schumer flinches, you have your budget. If he continues to fight, he's the one who pays the price. Either way, they lose. Trump blew air out through his nose and nodded slowly. And they know it. Mark Meadows, no great fan of sugarcoating reality, took a step forward. We drive this forward, Mr. President. Full court press. We make it clear. This isn't about your holding the government hostage. This is about their unwillingness to govern. Exactly. And tomorrow we make sure everybody in this country know it. He clapped his hands once. Sharp. Decisive. Press conference. 9 a.m. I want all Republican senators, all members of Congress, every damn conservative voice in the country driving this home. He turned to Kevin McCarthy, who was already on the phone. Kevin, get your leadership is in order. It should be saying the same thing. Loud and clear. McCarthy shook his head briefly and walked toward the door. Meadows pulled out his phone. We're going to start feeding this to our media dudes. We catch them before they even got a chance to spin it. Trump watched as they headed down the street, the machine kicking into gear. He could already picture the headlines. The Democrats had walked into this trap, and by the time they understood where they found themselves, it would have been too late. Then slowly he pivoted to Stephen Miller, who snapped to ready for duty, hands clasped before him, eyes aflame with the satisfaction of a man who had seen this moment play out long before anyone else. Trump's voice dropped, deep and vicious. I want Schumer on the run, cornered with no place to run, by the end of this, Stephen. Miller didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. Oh, Mr. President. His voice was glassy slick. The ghost of a smile at his lips. He already is. The proverbial wheels had already been set in motion. Kevin McCarthy stood in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, mustering Republican leadership. Mark Meadows was firing off messages, paving the way for tomorrow's media blitz. Stephen Miller sat still, watching all this unfold with the bearing of a man who had seen the endgame long before the rest of us. This wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about making a statement. Chuck Schumer and the Democrats weren't just trying to block a budget. They were trying to bring him to a stop. To slow down, to hamper, whatever they could do to screw up his presidency. But they had miscalibrated one thing: Donald Trump didn't back down. He didn't play defense. He attacked. He turned to the screen, now dark where Schumer's face had just appeared. His expression shifted. Not only amusement, not only calculation. It was something sharper. Resolve. Then he spoke, his voice a low pour but rich with the moment. They tried this before. It didn't work back then, and it damn well isn't going to work now. Miller gave a small nod. Mr. President, tomorrow Schumer is going to find out that he's playing a game that he can't win. Trump paused for a breath, then smiled again. Good. Let him squirm. Then after one last glance around the room, he grabbed his coat, threw it over his shoulder, and made his way to the door. The decision was made. The message was set. The fight was about to start. And Trump knew precisely how this was going to end. As the door to the Situation Room swung shut, the weight of the moment settled. But this was not just a political calculation. It was a master class in leverage. In control. Before a single shot was fired in reading the battlefield, Chuck Schumer thought he could run out the clock on Trump. He was wrong. The Democrats thought they could dominate the narrative. They did not give enough credit to the American people. Because, after all, Washington was a city of stories. It was about control of the narrative. Who controlled the fight? And while the media spun and the left screamed, the numbers didn't lie. Trump got the people, and that was real trump card. Because in politics, like business, when you have the winning hand you don't negotiate. You set the terms.